Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the March 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of People's War Has Shattered the Hesitations of the Women of Dandakaranya, an interview with Anuradha Gandhi from 2001. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. You can find a link to Patreon in the video description. So this is not our first audiobook from Anuradha Gandhi here at the channel. We previously have done other works of hers, including Fascism, Fundamentalism, and Patriarchy, and Philosophical Trends in the Feminist Movement, which details basically the differences between, for example, liberal feminism, radical feminism, Marxist feminism, and so on. Gandhi lived from 1954 to 2008. She was involved with various branches of the communist movement in India from basically her university days onward. At the time of her death in 2008, which was caused by complications from malaria, she was affiliated with the Communist Party of India, Maoist. Anyone familiar with the communist movement in India will know that there are sort of many splinters. There's the Communist Party of India, Marxist, Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist Liberation, Communist Party of India, Maoist, etc. So, as the title of this piece suggests, People's War Has Shattered the Hesitations of the Women of Dandakaranya, Gandhi's work in the Communist Party of India, Maoist, did involve training people in People's War, a guerrilla warfare method developed by Mao Zedong. So, getting on to the interview now, this was an interview with Anuradha Gandhi using the alias Janaki, granted to Poru Mahila, the organ of Krantikari Adivasi Mahila Sangatan of Dandakaranya. The first publication was in the March 2001 issue of Poru Mahila. This edition is courtesy of Marxists.org, the Marxists Internet Archive, posted there December 2019. The original source is the Nexal Revolution blog, nexalrevolution.blogspot.com. You can find a link to that off of the Marxists.org link. So we begin with a note from the editor of Poru Mahila. It says, in this issue of Poru Mahila, we are introducing to our readers Comrade Janaki, who had been working in the urban movement and had come to Dandakaranya to observe the Adivasi peasant movement and to participate in it. Comrade Janaki had led the guerrilla squads directly as a divisional committee member of South Bastar from 1997 to 2000. Poru Mahila chatted with her on her experiences in the urban movement and in the Adivasi peasant movement. We are here presenting the main features of that conversation. So, first question. Comrade Janaki, would you please first explain to us the oppression faced by urban women? Answer. Though all women in India are under feudal, capitalist, imperialist, and patriarchal oppression, it is seen in various forms in different areas, the urban and the rural areas. The working class and middle class women in urban areas have some specific problems. Firstly, if we look at the problems inside the family, even in urban areas, women are oppressed by the feudal culture. Though the oppression of this culture may be less severe, still, the majority of the young girls and women do not get the right to take important decisions regarding their lives from the family. The unmarried girls are under pressure to marry men from the same caste and same religion, according to the decisions of the family. If a girl decides to marry a man of her choice from another caste or religion, she will be subjected to a lot of pressure. She would have to face severe opposition from the family. Even if a woman wants to work outside the home, she will have to take the permission of her father, brother, or husband. People of some castes and religions, for example the Muslims and Kshatriyas, do not like their women to do jobs, so it becomes inevitable for women to fight even for economic independence. In addition, since capitalist values have spread widely, man-woman relations have also become commercialized, and women are facing severe problems. The dowry and other items which have to be given to the groom's family before and after marriage has become a big problem for the parents who gave birth to girls. Added to that, it had become common to all communities to harass women for dowry, both physically and mentally. When the wife's life can be measured in money and gold, killing her for their sake is not far behind. This terrible situation can be found in many households in the urban areas nowadays. Especially since the past 25 or 30 years, maybe India is the only country in the world where the new crime of burning brides for dowry has come into vogue. One thing we have to observe is that a part of women belonging to the working class and the middle class do not get an opportunity to go out and take up jobs. All their time is spent in housework and working for the family. As a result, they depend on others for their living. Socially, they depend on their husbands. That's why they don't try to do anything independently. There are so many restrictions on them to venture out or step outside the threshold. And if we look at the women who take care of their children's studies, it is almost like a machine. All her work revolves around her husband, the children's studies, and sending them to tuitions. The conditions of the working class in urban areas are pitiable. The main reason is the severity of the problem of not having a place to stay, so the poor are forced to set up house illegally in open places. Many of them build a hut on the sides of the roads, railway tracks, and sewers, even on top of sewers. In narrow lanes and the sides of the roads, hundreds of families are living by building shacks. There is not even an inch of space to build a bathroom, or a place which can be called a veranda. As the towns expand, slums keep increasing on the sides of roads, on rocky places, and on the small hills inside the town. They do not have toilets or water facilities. Crowded people, polluted environment, and lack of basic amenities. Women do their work facing all these problems. Fighting for water is a common sight. In bastis like these, Gudaism and their harassment is another problem they face. Comment: Gudaism, sometimes written as Gundaism, is like rowdiness, rough, antisocial behavior, maybe lewdness. Anyway, continuing. But above all, the biggest problem is the demolition of these bastis by the municipal and government authorities on the allegation that they are illegal. Usually it comes upon the women to oppose the demolitions, because when officers come in the daytime with the police and bulldozers, it is usually the women and children who are at home. The capitalist system does not recognize the right to have a household as a basic right. Women in urban areas have many opportunities to step out of home and work. They get jobs in factories, offices, schools, hospitals, and shops. But in many jobs they are not paid equally with men, or the salaries are so low that they cannot run a household with that. Many working-class women work in the construction industry under the contractors. Many women work as maids. All these works come under the unorganized sector. These do not have any job guarantee or a guarantee for salary. On top of it, they have to face harassment from the contractors and the men under whom they work. This takes place in many forms. Not only the working-class women, but even educated, middle-class women are facing such harassment. Women are harassed with such pressurizing tactics as threatening to oust them, not giving them work, transferring them, writing bad remarks in their records, etc. Very few women are able to share such things with others. Nowadays in big cities, electronic industries of the imperialists have come up on a large scale. Girls are employed in many of them, but the problems of more labor, lower salaries, and a ban on organizing are present in these industries, so they have to fight even for the basic right of forming labor unions. In the past, some industries like beedi making and agarbatti making were thriving in households. Comment: beedis are like little thin cigarettes and agarbatti is incense. Now, even many new companies are giving most of the work to do at home. The poor housewives are taking up these jobs thinking that they can earn a bit while being at home. There's a lot of exploitation in this work. Even if they work all day long with the help of their family members, it is difficult for them to earn even 20 rupees. The labor power of poor women is paid very badly. They are being exploited a lot, is what I want to say. Lastly, another point is the influence of imperialist culture being very great on the urban women. They are not only influenced by consumerism, but are also victims of it. This is increasing day by day. Instead of human values, they are giving more importance to beauty and beauty products. As a result, there is an environment of insecurity due to atrocities and harassment in the urban areas. The young women are facing a feeling of insecurity to step out of the house. In an urban life, women are suffering from many such problems, but there are very few organizations which fight against them at present. Next question. Tell us about the various trends in the women's movement. Answer. Around the 1980s, there was a spontaneous outburst of the women's movement in many parts of the country, especially in the cities. This movement was an indication of the increasing democratic consciousness and anti-patriarchal consciousness among the women. After the Naxalbari movement dealt a severe blow to the semi-feudal, semi-colonial system in India, there was an outburst of working class and student movements, and there was the emergency and the social, economic, and political crises of the ruling classes. The women's movement sprung out of this background. Internationally also, there was the influence of the student and women's movements. Mostly the student, middle class, and professional women participated actively in these movements. Out of these spontaneous democratic movements, many small and big women's organizations also took form. But in the past 20 years, there have been many changes in the women's movement, their political character, and in these organizations. Later, the women's liberation movement, dependent on the urban middle-class women, split into various political and ideological streams. In the nationality movements, especially in the Kashmiri struggle for their self-determination, the active participation of women has increased considerably. Women are playing a prominent role in exposing the inhuman atrocities of the police and army. Under the leadership of the party, revolutionary women's movement has developed well in the rural areas, especially in Dandakaranya and North Telangana. Even the BJP and RSS have recognized the strength of women and are paying attention to spreading decadent social values and vicious politics among them. So I just want to pause to comment there. First of all, the BJP is the current ruling party of India. That's what Modi belongs to. And I mentioned earlier that Gandhi had also written an article called Fascism, Fundamentalism, and Patriarchy. This is also about the BJP. Basically, she considers them fascist, as part of the overall Hindutva movement, which is the deeply right-wing movement in India. So anyway, she mentioned the Naxalbari movement, which dealt a severe blow to the semi-feudal, semi-colonial system in India, following which there was an outburst of working class and student movements, and then also the emergency, that's capital E, emergency, and the social, economic, and political crises of the ruling classes. And out of all this, the women's movements sprung out of that background. Okay, so what's the Naxalbari movement? This was an armed peasant uprising, basically 1967 to 1969, in northeast India, the Darjeeling province within West Bengal. This is northeast India between Nepal, the Tibet Autonomous Region within China, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. This was an important moment within Indian communist history. We will cover it in greater depth later on. It caused a lot of realignment, reshuffling of different factions within the communist movement, and different parties sort of splintered and reformed as a result of this, or at least in the wake of it. Now, moving on to the emergency, this is a period from 1975 to 1977 when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency. Again, this is like a whole thing in and of itself, but India had been going through a pretty turbulent time. I mean, you have armed uprisings in the late 60s. There is a war with Pakistan, 1971, as well as the global oil crisis of the 70s. And during this 2 years of the state of emergency, it was the government, they were doing sort of house-to-house raids looking for Maoists in some areas. All kinds of stuff was happening. Again, we'll cover this in greater depth later on, but this is a pretty turbulent time. The point is that out of all of this struggle emerged various movements for democracy and people's liberation and, for example, the women's movement. So anyway, continuing on, many women who had spontaneously participated in movements against dowry deaths, sati, and harassments drawing the attention of the nation toward such problems had withdrawn from the movement, but many out of them have gained a name for themselves as researchers and ideologues on women's issues, both in India and abroad. Many of them formed voluntary organizations, NGOs. They are getting funds from international agencies for women's studies and emancipation of women, but they have a feminist viewpoint and a feminist ideology. Now, they have become propagandists for feminism, meaning that patriarchy is the main problem of women, that we have to fight only against patriarchy. But patriarchy has its roots in class society. In all societies, it is perpetuated by the exploiting classes, i.e. feudalism, capitalism, and imperialism. So fighting patriarchy means fighting against these exploiting classes. But the feminists are against recognizing this. They believe that women's conditions in this society can be changed by politically lobbying with the governments and by propaganda alone. In reality, this feminist stream today is representing the class outlook and the class interests of the bourgeoisie and upper middle class women in the country. Quick comment there. What she's describing is liberal feminism. I'm not sure why she's not drawing that distinction here, considering that she wrote an entire book on the subject. As I mentioned earlier, there are different strains of feminism, some of which have a feminist outlook. It doesn't necessarily mean that patriarchy is the root problem. That's more of like a lib-fem, rad-fem type of thing. With radical feminism, I mean, even going into like the biology is the problem and like men and women need to be separate. Personally, I consider myself to have a feminist outlook, meaning I am not a social conservative. I don't basically think that social conservatism is compatible with Marxism. But sometimes you get kind of a white male perspective on Marxism, which is really ignorant of and blind to and even hostile to matters that aren't strictly related to, you know, increasing the paychecks of the white male breadwinner kind of thing, which it's not real Marxism, you can say. But I think that having an emphasis on the other kinds of oppression that we're looking to uproot, along with class oppression, which arguably stem from class oppression and are mainly enabled by class oppression, I think that it's important to name those things and to keep them out front so that your movement doesn't get hijacked by, quote, illiberal forces. You know, we've covered this issue of social conservatives trying to hijack Marxism. Basically, you get a fascist movement at that point. There are certain people who, you know, call themselves Marxists talking about things like this. For example, we did a whole video criticizing a video by Caleb Maupin where he's talking about the illiberal tendencies of some of the, quote, anti-imperialist forces. You know, if you look up illiberal in the dictionary, it doesn't really have positive connotations. It's like indifference to the points of view of other people, stinginess, narrow-mindedness, intolerance, lack of being cultured. These are all things that we associate with the oppression of class society, not with progressive social forces. Yet there is this effort today to kind of take on support for right-wing nationalist movements because of imperialism, because they are, quote, anti-imperialist. This is an issue we're having today, talking about Russia and its aggression towards Ukraine. And I think that there are a lot of kinks that need to be ironed out of that discussion because, you know, if, again, you don't want your Marxist movement to get co-opted by entirely right-wing forces, you got to make some kind of a stand against this. Anyway, with regard to feminism, this is an important thing. However, when Marxists fight for women's liberation, it is different from when liberal feminists just fight for more women capitalists, more women's rights within capitalism. It's a big difference there. So anyway, let's continue with the interview. The women organizations of revisionist parties like CPI, CPM, and Liberation, comment, remember I mentioned some of these before, are working actively in some cities. They run movements on social and political issues of women. Along with issues of women's oppression, they even take up processions and do dharnas on problems like the price rise, etc. They are different from the feminist stream because they don't give importance only to struggles against patriarchy, but they're also completely reformist organizations. Because of their revisionist politics, they are not linking women's liberation with revolution, and are working with the belief that by changing governments, they will be able to improve their conditions inside this existing social framework itself. For example, for the past 2 or 3 years, they have concentrated all their activities on gaining the right of 33% reservation for women in the parliament. Actually, the common people have lost confidence on the corrupt parliamentary system long ago. It has also been proven that whoever gets elected to the parliament will always serve the exploiting ruling classes and will not work for the rights of women or those of poor people. There are some organizations in the urban areas which are working actively, basing themselves on Marxist analysis, seeing the roots for the exploitation and oppression of women in the class society, and recognizing the link between women's liberation and social revolution. Since a decade, they have been working among the working class, students, and employees among women. Especially, they are working very well in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. They are not only taking up movements against women's oppression and other problems, but also doing extensive propaganda among women about their rights and about the exploitation and oppression perpetuated on them. It is an alarming phenomenon for the democratic and revolutionary women's movements that the Hindutva forces are also working among women. They are reinstating age-old feudal values in the name of opposing Western culture. Quick comment, that is basically what I was just talking about. This sort of embrace of like right-wing nationalists because they're, quote, anti-imperialist or anti-US or anti-Western values or something like that. But these are not also Marxists. Again, the point is socialism, not merely anti-imperialism, because remember, feudalism is also anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. It's also not something we want. Continuing. In the name of Hindu traditions and Bharat Mata, they are suppressing the growing consciousness of women. Not only that, they are carrying vicious propaganda against religious minorities among them. They are even giving them military training in the name of Nari Shakti. In brief, the women's movement is divided into various ideological streams all over the country. We have to study them and build up a strong women's movement by fighting against the wrong ideological trends in them. Question. How much do the outside people know about the revolutionary women's movement? What is its impact? Answer. The Adivasi women's movement emerging in the Dandakaranya since the last decade has a lot of prominence in the history of contemporary women's movements in India. The vigor and initiative of the Kashmir women is more than in other parts of the country. Thousands of women are coming into the streets opposing the cruel repression of the army and all kinds of atrocities. After the political activeness of Kashmiri women, it is the Dandakaranya Adivasi peasant women who are playing an active role socially and politically. They are organized on a wide scale in a large number of villages. They are opposing the age-old patriarchal traditions inside the Gandh Adivasi society. They are participating in the armed struggle against the exploiting government and its army and in political campaigns. This is a big victory of the Krantikari Adivasi Mahila Sangathan. But it is very sad that very little is available outside about the extent of the KAMS and about its activities. The CPI-ML, People's War members and sympathizers in other states, know little about it. The party put in some efforts for this. The paper written for the Patna seminar, it was published in Telugu and Hindi. The book on women martyrs and some stories and short stories helped in propagating it. But information about this revolutionary women's movement is not going out regularly. Even your magazine, Poru Mahila, is seen outside very rarely. It is necessary to plan its distribution outside the movement areas also. Nevertheless, even if there is only a little information that they may be getting, those belonging to democratic and revolutionary organizations are very much enthused about it. They are getting influenced by the determination and courage displayed by Adivasi women. Widespread propaganda about KAMS and its activities is much needed. Through that, we can give a fitting reply to the government's bad propaganda about the approach of revolutionary parties towards the women's question. Next question. Tell us about your experience in Dandakaranya. Answer. Before coming to Dandakaranya, I read articles and reports about the women's movement here, but I did not have an assessment that it was so widespread. That's why I was very happy about seeing the size of this movement. I must tell you something. In the lessons taught about tribal societies in the colleges, they say that the Gandhi society is very liberal. But after observing the Murya, Madhya, and Dorla people from close quarters, I understood how patriarchal the tribal society was too. I understood how important it is to study the problem of women's oppression deeply. Though the participation of Adivasi peasant women in the production process is huge, patriarchy had curbed their rights. While writing about the women's movement during the war for the New Democratic Society in China, Jack Belden, the American writer and journalist, had written, quote, "The Chinese Communist Party has got the key to the victory of the revolution. They have won over the most oppressed section of the Chinese society," unquote. When I saw the women's movement in Dandakaranya, it was these words of Belden which came to my mind. In fact, after the Chinese Revolution, It was the revolutionary movement in Dandakaranya that has proven that where there is a people's war, where there is armed struggle against the feudal, comprador, imperialist system for the victory of new democratic revolution, the working class women participate actively on a large scale for the emancipation of the whole society, as well as for their own emancipation. People's War had shattered the hesitations of the women. It doubled their strength. It showed the path for the liberation of women. There is a link between the semi-feudal, semi-colonial society and women's oppression. It has been proven once again by this victory of the Dandakaranya Party that the Marxist principle that we can carry forward the fight against patriarchy only along with the fight to end this system is correct. Wherever the party is working systematically, we can see that the participation of women is more in all political activities and movements. In 1998, due to the severe famine conditions in South Bastar, many women had migrated to Andhra Pradesh for daily wage work. There were KAMS range committee members too among them, but when we asked them to come for March 8th meetings, in one place 700 and in another 450 had attended. Before that, in rallies against famine conditions, thousands of them had participated. When I was there, women got recruited into PGA on a large scale. In some places, the recruitment of young women was more than the young men. The thing which influenced me the most was that the wives of married comrades who were already in the squads are also getting recruited. Many of them had given away even their little children to their relatives and are becoming guerrilla warriors in the ongoing Great People's War for changing this society. And I have seen many women comrades who stood steadfast with the People's War without looking back, even though within a few months their husbands had died in police encounters or in some other accident. By breaking away from the traditional, dreary, narrow confines of the family, they liked this new life more, although it is full of dangers. In that manner, their life and their existence is becoming meaningful. I have seen many comrades taking training and taking up new responsibilities. Building up KAMS units in every village, election of their committees, election of range committees and range conferences, sending the unit members to villages for propaganda campaigns, participation in bonds and other protest activities, giving them military training. All these are victories of this movement. But what I have observed in my experience is that since the AC, members are engaged without respite in various kinds of responsibilities, and due to some routine work style, KAMS work is being neglected. We have to think of new methods to involve the elderly women in the villages. Women and their children are facing a number of health problems. By increasing their understanding in these matters, and by paying special attention to their welfare, we can increase their zest. We have to increase their participation in the village-level meetings. Many people call the KAMS as an organization of young women. Widening their narrow knowledge of society is another challenge in front of us. Likewise, there is a need to give special social and political training to women members in the squads and platoons. We have to plan to give them continuous education in scientific knowledge regarding health problems. Though there are discussions on these topics due to lack of time and due to getting immersed in various works, they get postponed. We can get rid of their inferiority by giving them scientific knowledge and imbibing wide social thinking among them. Question: what is your message to the women working in squads and in KAMS in Dandakaranya? Answer: our Adivasi women comrades in Dandakaranya are building a new history today. Although it is the most backward area of the country, it is in the leading place in the ongoing women's movement in the country. They are answering the guns of the police in fitting manner by fighting equally with the men comrades in the armed struggle to free this country from the vicious grip of imperialism, feudalism, and comprador bourgeois clutches. In the villages, they are standing up for their rights by facing the threats and pressures of village elders. They are weakening patriarchy in Gandhy Adivasi culture. Though they are opposing such big enemies and forces, the shyness and sense of subordination, whose remnants are still present, are also their big enemies which are obstructing their development. Inferiority complexes come out of these. Its roots are very deep. What I want to tell my KAMS colleagues is that they should increase their self-confidence. They have to fight against the enemy inside them. In the coming days, KAMS will be facing many big challenges. The state repression is already there. Apart from that, the government will try to keep the Adivasi society and culture in backwardness with the help of village elders and through Adivasi leaders. It will become necessary for the KAMS to face them politically. Likewise, the KAMS should keep itself ready to put forward its understanding regarding true liberation of women by intervention in the women's movement, which is going on in the form of various streams in the country. To face all these challenges, our women comrades should attain political and ideological maturity and have self-confidence. That is the end of the interview. There's a final credit. This was translated by Nalama. And as often is the case, I have tweaked a word here or there that didn't seem to quite line up. Anyway, what did you think about this file? Leave your questions and comments in the comments area below. We'll pick it up from there as always. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. Every donation is encouraging. They are also materially helpful, so I really appreciate those a lot. Thanks to all of the patrons. If you'd like to help out without making a financial contribution, liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting all help to boost the channel, help more people to see the channel, boost it in the YouTube algorithm, and, for example, sharing it on social media directly puts it in front of other people, potential audience members who maybe aren't on YouTube so much and might only start watching because you put it in front of them. All right, I'm going to leave it there for today. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next video.